Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Internet of Things Made Simple. I'm Larry with Humor. This is both mini episode 36 and the third part to our series on helping organizations of all shapes and sizes through the stages of an IoT solution. Many thanks for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, first, welcome aboard. And I kindly ask you check out our webpage that has a ton of material on IoT. Everything from links to free ebooks, my book, blogs, older podcasts, and much more. The page can be found at, surprisingly, the Internet of Things Made Simple.com. Finally, two more quick things. We post each new episode on Wednesdays, so they're available for your morning coffee on Thursdays. Why not subscribe to have this happen automatically? And if that favorite podcast service offers the ability to leave a comment or a review, I would love for you to do so. In the first two parts to this series, we covered first how your company needs to do an honest assessment to get things started. This includes figuring out what you have now, what are your limitations and strengths, and what are you really hoping to gain from this new IoT solution. Once you have made it past that stage, you're on to stage 2. In that part, we covered 10 things that you should think about, and as I pointed out, there probably are more during your solution selection process. In this, the third part, we're going to assume you have chosen your solution, and you are now on to the really cool implementation phase. We will cover some important things you need to know to successfully implement your solution, whether your organization is big or small. The first point has to do with setting up devices. Most devices in the field are paperweights if they don't report what is going on back to some kind of a software package. This means there usually has to be some sort of programming or setup of the device to get them to report back. It may be simple settings, there might be a script that has to be loaded on board, or some of them have much more complex, nerdy programming that I'm not going to get into. If your solution provider is doing all aspects of the solution, so they're providing the hardware, the software, and the connectivity, odds are they will look after setting up the devices so you don't need to. If not, you likely are on the hook for doing so, which if you're installing hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of devices, that's a lot of work. Good news is there are some logistic companies that can handle this for you. Now that the devices are programmed, you're on to point number 2, installing them. In the case of a simple cellular gateway, it may be about as difficult as plugging in the box to the wall. However, many installations are more complex, especially if longer cable runs are used or if the device is installed in a specialized vehicle. Again, if the solution you are buying is a turnkey offering, there's a good chance that installation services are part of your overall offer. Either way, it's something you're going to want to look into. A device that is not installed correctly can perform quite badly and can result in some very unwanted downtime. Of course, you may have to then spend to get the device installed properly, which it should have been in the first place. In the next segment, we're going to talk about antennas and cables, which is something that people often overlook the importance of. Don't make that mistake and keep on listening. Okay, I won't make you wait. Point number 3 is about antenna and cables. So imagine you're doing some testing of your new solution, and in your office, everything works great. You get the solution out to one of your sites, and for some reason, it doesn't work great out there. It's slower, information seems to take much longer to be sent, and it seems to go offline some of the time or even all the time. What on earth is happening? This is one of the problems with bench testing only. Many offices have cellular coverage that is very strong, and this may not be the case out in the real world. To adjust for any potential low coverage areas, you need to ensure that you are using both the right antenna for the job and the correct antenna cable length. You might be wondering, correct antenna cable length? Why and how is that important? Even in the best cables, there's a loss of signal along the way for every foot or meter of cable length. By minimizing the cable length, you can maximize your chance of success. If you're not familiar with this, this may be a good reason for you to opt for a professionally done installation of your devices. Point number 4 has to do with the speed of your deployment. Once you have the solution ready, it's tempting just to get it rolled out all at once as fast as possible. However, that may or may not be a good idea. If you only have a very short time window to get everything done, then you might have to do that. It might be your only option. But in most cases, I would advise against that. Your IT and operations people or teams aren't exactly sitting around doing nothing, so you're going to want to be respectful of their time and their availability. As well, many kinks of a new solutions are found early, so a controlled rollout is much more preferred. Maybe do a few units, get any early bugs out of a system, then proceed slowly with the rest of your project. Getting bugs and issues out of a system leads to point number 5. Do you do everything on your live system, or do you spend extra to have a testing environment? If you've ever done work on a web page, you'll know the power of a test environment. You can make all the changes you want, make sure that you have all the issues out of the way, then make it live. The same concept goes for an IoT test environment. If you're using a hosted turnkey solution, there's a chance they're going to have one of these test environments for you to use to see how different changes may affect the user experience. If not, you'd have to build and maintain one on your own. Should you do this? The answer is up to you, but I think that the general rule, there's 2 factors you want to consider: the number of devices and the cost of unwanted downtime. If you have a lot of devices and/or the cost of a device going down is large, this increases the need for you to test things in a test environment. If you only have a few devices, it may not be as important. I'm definitely getting better at segues, as the cost of downtime factor leads us into point number 7. What is your backup plan? I've spoken many times in the past about how cellular connectivity is used to back up a key landline connection, and I've also spoken about the need to have contingency plans for your key systems in the event that an IoT-based system is not working. Both are important. So what are your backup plans for either scenario? Most hosted environments do a great job of having a backup system, which are not located in the same geographical area to prevent downtime on their end. However, what is your plan if there's an issue with your cellular provider and your devices can't transmit? What if a backhoe cuts your main internet connection at your office? You want to have backup plans for both. Again, the same idea about the number of devices and the cost of downtime apply. The larger impact that an outage would have, the more important it is to have a backup plan. This may include being able to go back to pen and paper and clipboard. It might be having a failback or fallback cellular connection to replace a cut landline, or even having an alternative site to be ready in case of an evacuation. If you have, say, 1 device in the field, not very pressing. If you have thousands, this better be on your list. Point number 7 is not so much a technical point, but rather, I guess, a request. Have patience. Everyone wants things to go perfectly smooth, but they rarely do. There is a joke in the IT world when it comes to scheduling how long it should take. You take how long it should take if things go right, and then you multiply it by 2 or 3, depending on your level of pessimism, I guess, to properly schedule it. Software should always work, but it doesn't. Hardware should always power up, but sometimes it doesn't. These things were built by humans, so there's always going to be issues. And it always seems that these issues crop up when you were demonstrating the solution to the boss, doesn't it? Remember, you're putting these solutions in for the next 3, 5, 10, or even more years. If it takes a little bit extra to get the kinks out of a system, do try to be patient. The first part of point number 8 was likely decided earlier in the process, and that is if you're going to be implementing the data from your IoT solution into an existing system that you have, or if you're going to use the system as a standalone. For the purposes of this point, we're going to assume that you're going to integrate the data into the system that you already have. So, do you try to use a system first as a standalone, get all the kinks out, and then try the integration? Or do both things at once? Part of this comes down to an earlier point we talked about on test environments. If you have one, it may be possible to do the integration work up front and get all the kinks out. If you do not, I may recommend running a small standalone test and before implementing it into the bigger overall software package. Okay, things are now working, and you're ready for deployment en masse. This is a very exciting stage. The next 2 points will help you get it right. Point number 9 is the internal side to the rollout. How do you get your team ready? Here, there may be an option to have the solution provider do the training. Should you do this? It depends on factors. Does your team use jargon and other things that may baffle an outside trainer? Do you have rules with unions that prohibit this? Do you have available people to do the training on a schedule that meets your team's needs? These are all questions you need to answer. The second part is how you may incentivize your team to use the system during the early stages. Sure, you can use the hammer approach, which is often effective. However, many solution providers may be able to help incentivize your team members in exchange for good reviews, so check into that. Finally, as we mentioned, you may wish to have backup plans ready. especially during the early phases, to lower down your team's anxiety level. On to point number 10, the final point, rolling this out to your customers. For many, your customers will never see any aspect of your solution, so you may think it's not important what they think. However, that's where you'd be wrong. Whether your customer is going to use any part of a solution or not, it's best to advise them of your deployment. You would obviously want to present it in a more positive way. Mr. Customer, we're putting in a new solution that will greatly expand our capabilities to offer you better service in the future. We may ask for a bit of patience in the beginning as we get any kinks out. Many customers will be understanding, and this may help to reduce your team's anxiety level to use these new solutions. To finish up today's episode, how would some of these things we spoke about apply to the 3 examples that we've been using? Let's start with that construction company. Being that many of their sites are remote, the part about cables, antennas, and professional installation would be extremely applicable here. You need to make sure that solutions work in the environments that your team need them to. Next, being that safety and uptime is an issue, and the fact that many sites are remote, you're going to want to have very strong backup or contingency plans for any solution to be successful. Finally, as I mentioned in previous episodes, many of those who work in the construction space are not known for being tech savvy, so patience is going to be needed here more often than in most deployments. On to that small restaurant chain. It's unlikely that a business of this size would have the needs for things like a testing platform, as the number of units being deployed would not justify it. One thing that would be justified is professional installation, however. Many restaurants are inside of concrete or steel buildings, and cellular coverage may be an issue. The extra cost for upfront installation may result in a much better performance over the length of the deployment and be well worth it. Finally, the real-time nature of restaurants, customers don't like to be kept waiting for their egg rolls. It's important that your team is up to speed quickly and your customers are informed of the use of a new system whenever possible. This may help to negate any bad reviews on Yelp. Our final example of the 3, as you may recall, is that of a small city or region. Unlike the first 2, I can imagine the city would want to have a test environment to iron out wrinkles prior to any solutions going live. Next, while professional installation may be preferred in many cases, there is a strong union presence in many cities, and this may not be possible. This is especially true for vehicles that the city may not own outright, like a bus or a truck, and those installations might need to be done by the company who builds them. Finally, as many services that a city offer are deemed to be vital to the public, and the fact that cities often have multiple locations that they use, the use of an alternative location, cellular gateways as backups, and other redundancy systems are vital. In many cases, they may even want to have a complete second system ready to go. Many thanks for taking time to listen to this podcast. Be sure to tune in to the final parts of this series next week when we go over some tips on how to maintain your system once it's installed. This covers things like when should you consider an upgrade, tips on scheduling maintenance, and much, much more. We'd love to hear from you, good, bad, or ugly. The first place to start is always our Facebook page, The Internet of Things Made Simple, which also has some links to other material as well. If I'm personally connected to you on LinkedIn, drop me a note through that service. And if we're personally connected via old-fashioned things like email or text, send me one of those. Talk to you soon. I'm Larry by Humor. Take care.